America has always had a love affair with the automobile, and no other car company has done more to provide Americans with ways to express that love than Pontiac. Today, Pontiac is GM's excitement division. But there was a time when Pontiacs weren't exciting. In fact, they were boring. Pontiac buyers didn't want fancy cars. They wanted cars that would run forever.
Their advertising slogan was a General Motors masterpiece, built to last 100,000 miles. In fact, lots of them did last 100,000 miles, and when people had a car that they knew was going to last that long, they weren't in a rush to come back and replace it.
Everything about Pontiac said stodgy, old style, and worst of all, slow. By the mid-50s, Pontiac had fallen to last place in sales among GM's divisions and was actually in danger of going out of business. But in 1956, a miraculous transformation started within Pontiac, which over the next few years turned these boring old cars into the sleekest, fastest rides in America. This transformation was engineered by a man regarded by many as the most brilliant automobile executive of the 20th century, Seaman E. Bunky Knudsen. Jim Wangers was just starting his career as Pontiac's advertising wizard at about the same time. He recalls Knudsen's credentials.
Mr. Knudsen was an inveterate racer. He just loved auto racing. He was an engineer by education. He got into the production engineering and the manufacturing. He was not really a marketer, but he liked cars.
Most of all, Bunky Knudsen had a knack for knowing what the car-buying public wanted. Knudsen also knew, long before most of the movers and shakers in Detroit, that the future of the auto industry was in the hands of a new wave of younger buyers who wanted cars that delivered a whole lot more than just basic transportation. Knudsen was determined that Pontiacs would be those cars. Under Knudsen's direction, a new image was created for Pontiac. This was the wide-track era, and no cars were ever so creatively styled or aggressively marketed.
The only car with wide-track wheels, which widen the stance, not the car itself.
Wide track became kind of a symbol for the new face of Pontiac.
A big part of Pontiac's problem was its low-performance engines. Knudsen had a fix for that, too. He created a task force of young engineers and sent them on a mission to put more punch into Pontiac's engines. In less than 5 years, they had more than doubled their horsepower and had also created a catalog full of brute-strength driveline parts to handle this extra power. Some of these parts never made it to the production line and weren't listed in any salesman's book. You had to be one of a very select group of racers to even know about them. Yet they became some of the most famous high-performance parts ever made. Today, the cars from this era are remembered by the name given to this engine development program. It was called Super Duty. How these magnificent cars propelled Pontiac from near extinction to the number 3 selling automobile in America is an amazing success story. Stay with us as Bunky Knudsen makes his entrance at Pontiac and things start to speed up on the American muscle car. With the clock ticking on Pontiac's future, Bunky hit the ground running. He knew Pontiac was long overdue for a complete makeover. But thanks to GM's styling cycles, Knudsen couldn't change body styles for at least 2 years. He could have an immediate impact on performance, though. His goal was to squeeze 100 more horsepower out of Pontiac's new little V8 engine. Pontiac had entered the modern V8 era for the first time in 1955 with a 287 cubic inch mill, which made all of 180 horsepower. By 1957, this engine had been bored and stroked to 347 cubic inches, and horsepower had increased to 270. There was also a special 10.25-to-1 compression version, which made an amazing 315 horsepower. With this engine, the 57 Pontiacs were over 3 seconds faster, 0 to 60, than the 55 models. Pontiac's engine development program started by redesigning the cylinder heads for improved breathing. A key figure in this effort was the legendary Mac McKellar.
There was a program on to make it breathe, and that bore fruit in 1957, actually, just about the time that Bunky Knudsen came. That program was ready, and so it really helped turn the 57 into probably one of the hottest street cars on the road at that time.
Loaded with new horsepower, Knudsen now wanted to win a few races. For help, he called on some famous names in the racing business, like Ray Nichols and Smokey Yunick. Some of these people were a bit skeptical.
He got a hold of Smokey one day and he said, Smokey, we're going to go racing. He says, we're going to get very serious about participating in some late model stock car racing. Smokey supposedly said, what are you going to race with? He says, well, a Pontiac, of course, at which point Smokey chuckled.
The chuckles didn't last long, however. When the Pontiac showed up at the 1957 Daytona Speed Weeks, they scored overwhelming victories in both the Flying Mile competition and the big Grand National stock car race. How these stock Pontiacs got so fast in such a short time was a mystery to everyone but Bunky and his engineers. For the Daytona race, they'd tooled up a special NASCAR version of the 347, sporting triple Rochester 2-barrel carburetors and a few other stock parts.
They selected a lot of outside manufacturers, aftermarket manufacturers, Edelbrock, for example, Iskandarian, for example, to build special parts for these Pontiac engines. The minute they had the proper part developed the way they wanted, they'd slap a Pontiac part number on it, and you could get it out of the parts department at any of your local Pontiac dealers.
Pontiac didn't have to rely on outside sources for long. Knudsen's engine lab was coming up to speed, and by 1958, there was a whole shelf full of high horsepower parts available to the car buyer. The block was punched out again, this time to 370 cubic inches. Tri-power carburation was a $94 option and also included special 10.5 compression cylinder heads and a high-lift camshaft to make 300 horsepower at 4,600 RPM. The next step up was a big one. For $500, you could get the new Rochester fuel injection setup, which used the same heads and camshaft and made 310 horsepower. The top-of-the-line racing goodies were called the Trophy 395A package. In addition to special heads and camshaft, the package included low-restriction exhaust manifolds and a Rochester 4-barrel carburetor. It cranked out 330 horsepower at 5,200 RPM and was bargain-priced at $320. Pontiac repeated its success at Daytona in 1958. And it was becoming a pretty exciting car. But the country was in a recession, and car sales were down everywhere. The sales slump hit Pontiac and Bunky Knudsen especially hard.
1958 was the all-time low sales year for Pontiac in modern history. They sold a little over 240,000 cars as a division, which was incredible. And, of course, it was very bothersome to Mr. Knudsen because his 5-year period was rapidly coming to an end.
But waiting in the wings were some truly eye-catching cars, the 59s. These were the cars that would start Pontiac on the road to recovery. Stay with us as we go wide-tracking on the American Muscle Car. '59 was a milestone year for Pontiac styling. If you like big cars with fins, that is. Along with a nice set of tail fins, the designers gave Pontiac two styling elements that have become synonymous with Pontiac: its split grille and the wide track stance.
Contrary to what a lot of people would like to think, wide track was not an engineering development. It was not conceived to make the car a better handler or better balanced or better ride. It was purely a styling exercise.
Even with wide track styling, performance continued to be the key word in Knudsen's makeover strategy. The engine lab punched out Pontiac's power plant again in 1959, this time to 389 cubic inches. The hottest version now made 345 horsepower, an astonishing 112 horsepower gain in just 3 years. By now, the Super Duty engine program was on a huge roll. With car builders like Smokey Yunick and drivers like Fireball Roberts, Pontiac's thundered to victory at race after race. In February, stock car racing entered the big leagues. The 1959 Daytona 500 would be the first race on NASCAR's new state-of-the-art high bank track. Qualifying speeds were averaging over 135 miles per hour. But the Pontiacs were capable of running at least 10 miles an hour faster than this.
Rim riding at 145 miles an hour, Fireball Roberts has passed 34 cars in one of the most amazing rides ever seen on a racetrack.
Despite its obvious speed advantage, Pontiac didn't win the Daytona 500 this year. But 100,000 race fans saw a sight they would never forget. Pontiacs running rings around Ford, Chevy, and Chrysler. For Bunky Knudsen and his engine wizards, it was the reward they'd been waiting for.
I can remember watching that, one of the first 25-mile races on television. I guess that was the first one that was televised. And my stuff was on those engines, so that was quite a thrill, you know.
Almost 400,000 Pontiacs sold in 1959. Thanks to fresh styling, awesome power, and a full-bore marketing push which redefined Pontiac as young America's performance car. Even though the production line Pontiacs didn't have all the Super Duty parts, the ad guys made sure you knew that those race-winning cars were powered by the same engine you could get in a new Bonneville. Sort of.
The term Super Duty, believe it or not, never got used in advertising. You'd use the term like especially equipped or, with special performance options and so on, but never used the term Super Duty. That was strictly a kind of an internal term.
By now, Super Duty parts were finding their way onto the streets and the drag strips. Jim Wangers thought getting Pontiac involved in drag racing was a great marketing idea.
I was able to convince the Super Duty guys that they should start to take some of these parts and make them available to the drag racers, because stock car drag racing was really coming into its own.
Wangers even got into the act himself. He helped build a factory super stock racing team at a Detroit dealership called Royal Pontiac. With Wangers driving, Royal's Hot Chief Catalina won the stock eliminator class at the 1960 U.S. Nationals. Going into 1961, Pontiac had momentum. Being out front was fun. And the only thing more fun was having a bigger lead. Stay with us as the Super Duty program shifts into high gear on the American muscle car. That was then. This is now. The era of the fins was over. The 1961 Pontiacs were smaller and almost 400 pounds lighter than the 60 models, with a complete body restyle which brought back the split grille front-end look. Absolutely no trace of Pontiac's dull and boring image remained. During the past 3 years, the stylists had poured luxury into this car until it rivaled Buick and Cadillac for beauty and comfort. Pontiac's interiors now featured leather-trimmed upholstery, a fully instrumented dash, and a full sheet of luxury options. Power brakes were available for $43, six-way power seats for $97, power windows for $104, and the magic automatic headlight dimmer for $43. Air conditioning set you back a heavy $430. but you could save big on cruise control for just $16. But even though the cars were becoming luxurious, Knudsen continued to dance with the ones that brought him to the party, those powerful engines. After 5 years of R&D, Pontiac's engineers delivered the magic bullet that Knudsen had been waiting for, the 421 Super Duty engine. This was the crown jewel of the Super Duty program, and it was a no-holds-barred racing engine. With a Ford steel crank and rods, the McKellar solid lifter cam, special 13-to-1 compression cylinder heads, and 2 Carter AFB 4-barrels on a special aluminum intake manifold, this barn burner was rated at 405 horsepower. The little motor that had started life as a 287 cubic inch boat anchor was now the meanest engine in the auto industry. In the 5th year of Bunky Knudsen's 5-year plan, it had all come together. Pontiacs won 21 of the 51 Grand National events that year, and the factory drag racing teams were dominant. Sales were up, and by 1962, there was no more talk from the GM brass about closing Pontiac down. Now, for the first time, Super Duty engine parts were coming out of the closet. Literally everything from the fan to the flywheel had been redesigned for high performance. Now, having a race-winning Pontiac was just a matter of choosing the right combination of factory parts. The Super Duty drag racers had another speed secret in 1962, lighter cars. We'll tell you all about it when the American muscle car returns. Pontiac had everything going its way on the stock car tracks in 1962, even adding a young Roger Penske to their super team. Out on the drag strip, though, Pontiac was caught up in some furious competition. The new buzzword in the super stock pits was aluminum.
We had a handicap because we were heavier, and so we really ought to do something about cutting the weight down on these cars. And so we came up with the incredibly original idea of building some aluminum parts.
Just about everything forward of the firewall could be replaced with aluminum, all with Pontiac factory part numbers, of course. Pontiac racer Bill Blair has restored several aluminum-nosed factory race cars. He has to be careful of the thin metal, even when working on them.
Now you could bend them, change the spark plugs, and you had to reach up under and push the fenders back out.
By now, of course, thanks to Pontiac's drag strip success, the Super Duty Cat was clearly out of the bag, which meant with enough money and the right part numbers, you could have your very own 421 SD Catalina. If you didn't mind getting it in kit form.
You could go to a dealer and order out a Super Duty car. You got the car built with Pontiac's highest production engine, highest performing production engine. Then you proceeded to buy the parts, go to the parts counter. The block, the crank, the heads, the rods, the pistons, the intake manifold, the exhaust manifold, the valves, everything. And literally assembled it on your own.
Going into 1963, the trend toward lighter cars continued. But there wasn't a part on the car that hadn't been lightened. Except the frame. Enter some truly incredible cars, the Swiss cheese Pontiacs. Drilling a few hundred large holes in your car's chassis might not sound like a good idea to the average car owner, but it was a great way to go faster. Every pound saved made the car quicker, and that's all that counted.
Those cars, I think they got about 40, 50 pounds out of the frame by stamping the holes in it. And Roger Huntington saw it, and he just named it looks like Swiss cheese, and that's the reason they call them Swiss cheese cars.
But the most awesome Super Duty car ever built is this one. This is the 1963 421 Super Duty Tempest. 13 of these cars were built with aluminum front ends and a special transaxle called the Power Shift transmission. These little Tempests could run in the low 10s at almost 140 miles per hour, but you had to know how to drive them.
You come out about a car length and you fill the car, take a hold, and then you can go ahead and open it wide open. And from then on, all you did was pull the lever.
The Super Duty Tempest was the last blast of all-out racing technology from the Super Duty Group, which was about to receive a surprise from management.
In November of 1962, just a little less than 3 months later, General Motors dropped a bomb on all of their divisions and on the entire racing community, and informed everybody that they were actively withdrawing from any participation in motorsports.
With this decision, Pontiac's Super Duty program ceased to exist overnight. But thanks to the momentum from the Super Duty cars, two wonderful things happened. The first, of course, is that Pontiac survived. The other is the car which picked up the excitement of the Super Duty cars and took it to the streets, the '64 GTO.
So what they forced Pontiac to do was to take their performance off the track and put it on the street.
By the time the first GTO rolled onto the streets, Bunky Knudsen had left Pontiac to become the president of General Motors. But Pontiac lovers everywhere will tell you that Super Duty still lives. It's a part of Pontiac's heritage, just like wide track. Bunky Knudsen's 6 years at Pontiac did more than rescue the division. It gave them a corporate mission they still pursue today: excitement. Thanks for watching, and please don't crush them, restore them.